One of the things I think is really interesting about the Zerta ban is something to speak towards Wizards' banning policy, right? Where I do think there is a change that's happening. Last year, they kind of dragged their feet with both Oko and Hogak, right? Like they like banned Bridge from Below instead of Hogak. They like let Oko last longer than it maybe should have in formats, partially because it like hit during December, so like Christmas break happened, so there was like no tournaments for 3 weeks straight, so there was like no reason to ban him, but also just the way banning schedules were based out at that point. So this seems much more proactive in their banning of Zerta, because Zerta wasn't like filling every table with decks that were playing them. It was more, they said it in the announcement, this is something that we noticed had a win rate that was too high, even though it wasn't defining the format yet. And we were worried that once Luros was gone, or even if we let it go and Luros let Luros stay in the format, it would become a problem pretty shortly. So we just got rid of it now ahead of time, which I think is an interesting just kind of philosophy towards the ban list that is different than historically, where they're like, no, we want to see how the format shakes out. And it is kind of what they're doing in Modern and Standard, even though the other big announcement that was a part of this was that they are considering even changing the rules of Companion and how they work.
I think that the swift action on companion bans makes sense, because where if you have a powerful card that is introduced to a format, you sort of have that conversation as Wizards, and you're hemming and hawing, should we or shouldn't we let's look at, patterns and play data from tournaments. Like, you have one very, very key variable from that data figured out already, which is that on this turn of the game, this card is going to be in the opening hand of this player every single time. So we know exactly how this is going to work, unless we can come up with a reasonable idea of how this can be thwarted by the other decks. We know this is a problem. I think it's worth banning quickly, because it's one of Magic's truths that has never really been realized until now, which is like, you shouldn't have the game in competitive 1v1 formats be able to hit the exact same beat every single game in perpetuity. That's just not how the game was designed. So if you know it's going to be like that, it allows you to ban things a little quicker.
I also think that, like, their philosophy, they've said, it's like this famous Eldraine article that's been going around recently, especially because of Companion, where they like are intentionally raising the power level of sets to affect more of Magic, right? Because there were this string of sets like Ixalan Block that were like barely touching Eternal formats. So, they are making a conscious decision to print more powerful cards to affect formats like Modern and Legacy and Commander and whatever else. I mean, I guess every set kind of affects Commander, but like make more waves, right? Because
like that was, they went like a 3-year period where Mono Red was the best deck in Standard the entire time. And like, not just in older formats where they do want to affect it as well, but even in Standard at that point, they pointed out there was an issue where basically this was the best deck because Red is always kind of good, and we just couldn't, like, we stopped printing cards at the same power level as that base level, and we needed to fix that. Sorry.
Yeah, so because they're making this conscious effort to print more powerful cards that they expect will affect Eternal formats, but then they don't have the resources to sufficiently test Eternal formats, which is also something that they've said, it means that they kind of do need to be quick on bans. Like, if they're going to be printing these super powerful cards that they know are going to make waves in Eternal formats, but and they're not able to test them super well to know that everything will be okay, they have to be ready to ban. And like, I think banning cards kind of sucks. And it's like, basically we're kind of in this world where they either print these powerful cards and ban them, and you have to be willing to accept quick bans like that, or you have to say like, print less powerful cards, which like has its positives and negatives. Both sides have positive and negatives, right?
And there's two things there. One is the fact that, yeah, there's a whole kind of conversation, and they've said they probably will slow down a little bit on the power level, but it just takes 2 years for things that they've decided to happen to take effect. But the other thing is, you mentioned the like not having the resources to test for older formats, and I kind of wanted to address it because it's misquoted a lot. You didn't misquote it, but people on the internet always like use it as an argument against things, or like, maybe you should add a team that focuses on Modern. And they clarified a little bit, and basically it's not that they don't have the resources from a financial perspective, it's that they could never have the resources from a financial perspective. The team size needed to be able to test every card that they print for Eternal formats doesn't exist. There's too many cards. They would never be able to accomplish that. And so they made the decision to not put resources that would do, like, because that at best they would do a very medium job. And Modern Horizons is the example they used, I think Rosewater used it, where it's like, we put a lot of resources into trying to test Modern Horizons to make sure it wouldn't hurt Modern, and Modern Horizons made huge waves in every Eternal format. And so from their perspective, it's impossible for them, no matter how much money they spend, to be able to cover every Modern format, or cover Modern, Pioneer, Legacy, Vintage in any real way. Therefore, we don't want to spend those resources on that and would rather just use banning and maybe be a little bit more aggressive with those bannings when new cards come out. Which I think is the only way to do it. I think that's what they're discovering, right? Like, even if they go back to the old days of printing medium cards, there's always just going to randomly cards printed. We did an episode where we went through every single set in Modern history, and like, we're just like, oh, every single set other than maybe I think Born of the Gods had at least one, if not multiple cards that heavily affected Modern in some way. So I don't think it's impossible to have nothing affect it. It's just...
Right, it's just like now we're printing kind of format-defining cards like Oko and Uro and Luris, and like Once Upon a Time, as opposed to like Sphinx's Revelation is playable, and like
Grim Player is pretty good.
In your Merfolk deck, yeah. Collective Brutality. Well, like Eldritch Moon has like a bunch, but none of them are format defining. They're all just like utility cards you put in existing decks, like Collective Brutality.
I guess to put in perspective, like sort of what you're saying, Alex, just in case anybody who's listening is sort of trying to like wrap their head around what that means. So if you're testing for Standard right now, and I'm just using an arbitrary number because I'm just coming up with it. Let's just say you had 12 people testing for a Standard format, spending 400 hours each testing that format, right? In the whole course of testing that new set they were working on. So that's like testing basically one new set and how it affects how many sets are in Standard right now in the current format, like 5 or something like that? 6?
On the front and back end, it would be at most 7, right?
Okay.
3,
so if you have like,
or 8
basically,
if you count both core sets, maybe.
Let's say you have 12 staff members testing 400 hours total for how one set is going to affect 6 others. Even if you just kept the exact same number and you added 12 more people, which is probably completely outrageous and you would never be able to do to test older formats, there's like 70 Magic sets. More, actually. I think there's closer to 80 at this point. Modern. You're still dealing with like 40 to 50. It's like 5 to 6 times the amount of information you would need. You would need like 60 more employees all spending 400 hours each. And that's probably the trick.
Well, the problem is that even if you do that, let's say that they did hire 40 people to do this, right? Like, the number of hours that they're able to put in over the course of their development cycle is nothing compared to the millions of Magic players in one day. Like, millions of Magic players put in 2 hours the day that the spoiler gets released, and they're all collaborating on social media and posting on Reddit, and everybody is putting their just 2 hours, right? That's like 2 million hours in no time, right? Assuming 1 million people put in 2 hours each. And then over the course of a month, how many million people are putting in how many hours, Like,
I mean, if you guys have ever had that thing happen to you when they like spoil, 8 cards from a new set, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. You think to yourself like, well, that card could work with that card. That's kind of clever. And you like Google the card name, and there's like a Reddit thread that already has like 700 responses. And somebody's like, here's a deck list with the exact deck you should be playing with this new card. You're stupid for not thinking of this. And you're like, yeah, well, that was useless.
And even like Standard, a format that they put a lot of effort into, even then they miss, right? Like and they have the largest team that Wizards have ever had doing this process, but you have...
And also, like, people from other departments and stuff are allowed to play in the Future League and, like, test Standard just on the side. Like, even if their main job isn't a designer, they're allowed to, like, build Future Standard decks and play them just to, like, get a little bit of extra testing in, and it's still...
Like a countercat.
Not always enough.
Yeah, like, there's things that happen in Standard that they miss. Now apply that to every format ever. So, kind of to wrap up this hot take, like, the chances that Wizards could have the resources to be able to test for Modern or Pioneer even, or Legacy and Vintage could never happen. Actually, I think Vintage might be easier than the other ones. Puts them in a position where, like, maybe they need to be a little bit conscientious of it, but they're better off letting Standard be as fun as they possibly can make it, which has its own challenges, and then letting the, like, community response to figure out when bannings are. And I just want them to instead ban quickly, right? I'd rather them, if they think companion is going to be an issue in Modern, ban them soon. Don't let me buy a bunch of companions. Don't let me buy not a playset of Lorus's, but don't let me buy into this set. Like, instead of letting Oko get all the way to December, we kind of all knew by end of October that card was problematic, and they should have just nixed it as quickly and then just moved on. And I think they've realized that. I think that's something that's happening. And thanks for listening to this hot take. We have hot takes come out every single Tuesday. They come out early on our Patreon on Monday, so definitely check out Patreon. You can become a Noble House Modern. You can get early access to full episodes of the podcast. Podcast comes out end of the week, so every Friday, and then audio format earlier in the week. And please subscribe, like the bell, comment. We'd love to hear what you think about how soon should they ban cards. Is Wizards doing it fast enough, or should they do it a little bit slower and take their time? We'd love to hear your thoughts.